Hey everyone. Today I want to take a look at what can sometimes be a very frustrating Canvas feature, and that is balancing new quizzes and classic quizzes and understanding how to import things into Canvas. So on my page right here, I've got assignment quizzes opened up, just a category. I have two different quizzes. One is somebody's quiz that's quiz chapter 7 to 12, and one that's a quiz that was just written as a test for Lockdown Browser, as an example. When you're looking at your Canvas course, you can tell the difference between a classic quiz and a actual what they call new quizzes by looking at the little rocket ship icon. The old green hollowed out icon, that is the classic quiz. This is a new quiz. Now, Canvas has been migrating away from classic quizzes for a while now. I don't know when there's going to be an official date for when that migration will be complete. Right now, your institution may allow you to create both classic and new quizzes. I'm really pushing people to start getting familiar with new quizzes as quickly as possible because I have not been satisfied with the way that Canvas migrates things from old quizzes to new quizzes. But that's just a little backstory. So I'm going to put together probably 3 videos. One that's going to talk about just importing into new quizzes. One that is going to talk about the migration process from classic quizzes to new quizzes, and a third video that's really just going to be almost like a little commercial for a tool that I use that is GetMarked, which it does a great job of turning other types of materials, and in some cases even quiz banks that aren't necessarily created correctly or have some sort of flaw in them into something that I can import into Canvas. So let's get started. Let's start with the importing of a quiz. Now, I have already a file that is like the file you would get from most textbook publishers. It's just a zip file that's made for Blackboard, Canvas, or other learning management systems. And I've often told people that Blackboard was kind of the default learning management system. It was the old guard, if you will. And that kind of set the precedent for how a lot of these QTI packages work. If it can import it into Blackboard, you can probably import it into Canvas. But it's not as easy as it sounds. So here is my normal workflow for creating a new item bank. This is different than importing just questions right onto a quiz. I often create item banks in order to bank the questions. Now, when you're looking at item banks, you can find it usually, if new quizzes is enabled, you can find it in your navigation settings on the left-hand side. When I click the item bank for this sandbox course, I have some, these are probably just test imports that I was doing. Those are the item banks shared with this course. I also have the ability to look for institution banks if the institution you're working at has created banks that are used across courses. You can also find item banks that have been shared with me. Those are typically ones that you've created or someone has sent to you. And then item banks that are shared with courses. So I usually focus on, this is an item bank for this course or this series of courses. It's important to understand some of the permissions for item banks if you're working especially with multiple individuals on a course. That item bank, if I'm creating it, belongs to me. If I let someone else have editing access to that, when they change questions in that item bank, it's changing mine. So a lot of times I will duplicate an item bank and give it to someone else and say, do whatever you want with it. But I'll get into that. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a blank item bank. Now, technically, it really doesn't matter what I call this. So I'm going to say this is a test upload, and I'm going to share it with this course. That way, it's easy for me to find it when I come back to it rather than having to search through all the item banks that I have. Now, I've created it. It defaulted back to shared with me. I'm going to go to this course, and here's this test upload item bank. And I'm going to click into that. And I'm going to go over to the import content. And here's where it's asking for a QTI 1.2 and 2.x file. This is typically the type of file that I have gotten from a publisher that goes along with a textbook. So I'm going to drag that over here and click import. And it's going to go through the steps of importing that content. This is usually where, if there's a problem with the import, I am going to see that kind of show up here. Now, this one says it's been successfully imported. So if I click done, I can see here's a list of all of the questions. I could go in and edit them. I can probably, well, it doesn't tell me exactly how many questions are in there right now. So I'm going to go back and just click on item banks. Now you're going to notice that in this course, I no longer have an item bank that was named, test uploads, because most item banks, I'm going to open this up for you, even though it's probably a little bit beyond the scope of what you want to know. Most item banks are really a zip file that contains two files. The XML file, and I'm going to edit this with a notepad, just a editor on here, and I'm just going to show you that one of the things that is in this file is a title, and that's the title of a game. So the file comes along with its own name, and so I'm just going to rename this test upload again. So a lot of times if I'm doing a lot of these, I don't even bother really naming it. I just will make a bunch of, item banks named 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I will upload them and start to pay attention to what's going on with that. So that's really the key when you're working with this. I have not found that if I go through the home page and I say import existing content, and I come down here and say, here's a QTI file, I'm going to import that same QTI file that I just had a second ago. I'm going to drag that here and say, create a new question bank. I'm going to title it, test upload 2, and convert content to new quizzes. I normally don't do any of that when I'm working on it, but I'm going to add that to the import queue and just see what happens. So progress is running right away, so that's helpful for me on the creation of the video here. It says it's completed, and now I'm going to go into my item banks and see if it actually did. I am not seeing that upload, test upload 2. So let's see about shared with me. All right, I'm just going to break in here with a small correction. I noticed when I was editing the video that I had checked the box to convert to a new quiz, and it made me think I was looking in the item banks before for the quiz, which it did not create an item bank. However, when I go to the actual quizzes, you'll see that it actually created the quiz. So if you are just trying to get items onto a quiz, that's totally fine. But if you are trying to get things into an item bank so that you can reuse them on multiple quizzes, not as helpful. You'll see that it did change the name from test upload 2. It put the original name of the quiz, but it put it right in my quizzes in that course. I went back and tried to do it without clicking that button to convert to new quizzes, and then I got a classic quiz with those questions, which is still not putting it in an item bank directly. So the import content is just focused on creating the actual quiz, like the assignment. But again, if you're looking for item banks, you have to go create the item bank and import there. I'll show some tricks for getting things from a classic quiz into an item bank and how to do it from a new quiz into an item bank. It's a little bit more tedious to do afterwards, so I recommend getting them into item banks to start with, and then using those item banks to create quizzes, even if it's a quiz that is going to be the same from semester to semester. But I have had to do this by coming in and creating an item bank from scratch, giving it a name, and then once inside that item bank, I am going to import it. Now, it's important to remember that item banks are only visible to new quizzes, so you can't use these item banks with a classic quiz. But that will be the topic of my next video, which is migrating from classic quizzes to new quizzes, or being able to take an item bank out of classic quizzes and replace it in new quizzes. So I really hope this has been helpful in getting the item banks imported for you.